The hospital corridor stretched endlessly before me, its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows that seemed to mirror the guilt clawing at my chest. 2 days. My mother had lain on the kitchen floor for 2 entire days before Mrs. Henderson next door heard her weak calls for help. 2 days of silence from the woman who once filled our house with laughter, songs, and the constant rustle of her caring presence. Emily? The nurse's voice pulled me from my spiral of self-recrimination. Your mother is stable now. She's asking for you. I walked into room 314 with legs that felt like lead, my heart hammering against my ribs. There she was, Martha Sullivan, the woman who had been my universe for the first 18 years of my life, now looking so small against the stark white hospital sheets. Her gray hair, once meticulously styled every Sunday for church, lay limp against the pillow. Her hands, which had braided my hair mornings after mornings and checked my forehead for fevers through countless nights, now bore purple bruises from the IV needles. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice a fragile echo of the strong soprano that used to call us in for dinner. "You didn't have to come all this way." Didn't have to come? The words hit me like a physical blow. Here was my mother, apologizing for needing me after I had abandoned her to her loneliness. I reached for her hand, noting how papery her skin felt, how her wedding ring, the replacement one Dad bought her after she sold the original to pay for Claire's college tuition, now slipped loosely around her finger. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The words tumbled out, inadequate and hollow. She squeezed my hand with what strength she could muster. "You have your own life, dear. I understand." But that was the problem. She always understood. She had understood when Michael missed Christmas because of a crucial business meeting. She had understood when Claire canceled her summer visit for the 3rd year running because of travel complications. She had understood when I reduced my calls to once a week, then every other week, then only when guilt gnawed at me enough to dial her number. The drive from the hospital to the house I grew up in felt like traveling through a time warp. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. The maple tree Dad planted when I was born now towered over the roof, its branches creating patterns of light and shadow across the front yard. The garden that had once been Mom's pride and joy showed signs of neglect. Weeds pushed through the flower beds like accusations of abandonment. I turned the key in the lock, the same key I had carried on my keychain for 15 years, but hadn't used in over 2, and stepped into the silence. The house still smelled like Mom's lavender satchels and Dad's coffee, but underneath lay something else. Loneliness, thick and oppressive as fog. Dad's recliner sat exactly where it had been the day he died 2 years ago. His reading glasses still rested on the side table next to a half-finished crossword puzzle, as if he might walk in at any moment and resume his evening routine. Mom had preserved it like a shrine, and I understood why. When you lose half of yourself, you cling to whatever remains. That first evening, I heated up a can of soup for dinner, the same brand Mom used to make when we were sick, though now it tasted like liquid salt and regret. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, moving the spoon listlessly through her bowl, her appetite clearly compromised by more than just her recent fall. "How is Michael doing?" she asked, as she always did. "And Claire?" "They're..." I paused, searching for words that wouldn't add to her burdens. "They're busy, Mom. You know how it is." She nodded, but I caught the flicker of hurt that crossed her features. She knew exactly how it was. She knew that her 3 children, the ones she had sacrificed everything to raise, had become strangers who sent flowers on her birthday and made obligatory phone calls on holidays. "I miss your father," she said suddenly, her eyes drifting to his empty chair. "The house is so quiet without him." I followed her gaze to that chair, and for a moment I could see him there. Tall, broad-shouldered Robert Sullivan, home from his construction job, newspaper in hand, listening to Mom recount her day with the patience of a man who had found his treasure in the ordinary moments of family life. He had been our anchor, the steady presence who kept us all tethered to each other. Without him, we had drifted apart like boats cut loose from their moorings. "I know, Mom," I whispered, but the words felt inadequate. How do you comfort someone for a loss you've compounded with your own absence? That night, I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars Dad had stuck to the ceiling when I was 7. They were faded now, barely visible, but still there, like the family bonds I had allowed to weaken, but not quite break. Through the thin walls, I could hear Mom moving restlessly in her room, probably staring at the empty space where Dad used to sleep. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the family group chat Michael had created after Dad's funeral. The last message was from 3 months ago, Claire sharing a photo from her vacation in Italy. Before that, Michael's promotion announcement. Before that, my own update about a work conference. We had reduced our relationship to a highlight reel, sharing only the polished, successful moments while hiding the struggles, the loneliness, the gradual decay of the foundation our parents had built for us. The gentle, slightly deep voice with a moderate pace. The narrator sounds like they are sharing a secret or a heartfelt memory with a close friend. The delivery is soft and reassuring, with pauses that allow emotions to sink in. The family meeting I organized took place 4 days after Mom's release from the hospital. Michael flew in from Chicago, his expensive suit and perfectly styled hair making him look like a stranger in the living room where we had once built pillow forts and played Monopoly until midnight. Claire drove up from Atlanta, her designer handbag and manicured nails marking the distance she had traveled not just geographically, but emotionally from the girl who used to garden with Mom every Saturday morning. We sat in the living room, the same room where we had unwrapped Christmas presents and celebrated birthdays, where Mom had bandaged our scraped knees and listened to our teenage heartbreaks. But now it felt like a courtroom, with Dad's empty chair serving as a silent witness to our collective failure. "So," Michael began, checking his watch with the impatience of a man accustomed to efficiency, "what's the plan here? Mom can't keep living alone, that's obvious." His tone was businesslike, clinical, as if we were discussing a problematic asset rather than the woman who had given us life and shaped us into the people we had become. "There are excellent assisted living facilities in Chicago," he continued. "I've already researched a few. The Willowbrook Center has 5-star ratings and—" "You want to put her in a home?" Claire interrupted, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Michael, she's not a problem to be solved." "I'm being practical," he shot back. "What's your suggestion? That we pretend everything is fine?" "She fell and lay on the floor for 2 days, Claire. 2 days. What if Mrs. Henderson hadn't heard her?" The question hung in the air like an indictment. What if, indeed? What if Mom had died alone on that kitchen floor, surrounded by photos of the children who had grown too busy to visit, too important to call? "I could," Claire started, then faltered. "I mean, my job requires a lot of travel, and David's practice is just getting established, but maybe I could—" "Could what?" Michael's voice grew sharper. "Visit once a month? Hire someone to check on her? Face it, Claire, none of us are in a position to provide the kind of care she needs." I watched this tennis match of excuses and justifications, feeling my own anger build. Here we were, the three people who owed everything to the woman lying in the next room, and we were negotiating her life like a business deal. "Listen to yourselves," I said, my voice cutting through their argument. "Listen to what you're saying about the woman who what, Emily?" Michael turned his corporate gaze on me. "Who raised us? Who sacrificed for us? We all know the story, but guilt doesn't change reality. I have a wife, 2 kids, and a company to run. I can't just uproot my life to move back to a town that has nothing for me. And I suppose your financial success means you get to buy your way out of responsibility?" The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't regret them. Michael's jaw tightened. "Don't lecture me about responsibility, Emily. You live 3 states away and visit twice a year. At least I'm trying to find a solution." "A solution that conveniently removes the problem from your conscience?" Claire muttered. "Enough," I said, standing up, but it was too late. The argument had awakened something in the house, or rather, someone. Mom appeared in the doorway, moving slowly with her walker, her face pale, but her eyes sharp with the pain of hearing her children's voices, raised in anger over her fate. She looked at each of us in turn, and I saw something die in her expression, a final hope that maybe, despite everything, we were still the family she had tried so hard to create. "I don't want to be a burden," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the sudden silence. "Maybe I should go to a nursing home." The words hit me like a physical blow. This woman, who had never asked for anything for herself, who had worn the same winter coat for 15 years so she could afford our school clothes, was apologizing for needing us. "Mom, no," I started, but she held up a trembling hand. "I raised you to take care of each other," she said, her eyes filling with tears she was too proud to let fall. "But somewhere along the way, you forgot how to take care of anyone but yourselves." The accusation hung in the air, brutal in its simple truth. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his professional confidence cracking. Claire looked down at her hands, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the shame creeping across her features. Mom turned and walked slowly back to her room, leaving us alone with the weight of her words and the echo of Dad's absence in his empty chair. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee and staring at the refrigerator covered with photos, birthday parties, graduations, family vacations from years past. There we were, the Sullivan family, smiling and happy, arms around each other, secure in the certainty that nothing could break the bonds we shared. When had that certainty died? When had we started measuring our love in holiday cards and birthday gifts rather than presence and attention? When had we decided that success meant leaving behind the people who made that success possible? Around midnight, I heard soft footsteps on the stairs. Mom appeared in the kitchen doorway, wrapped in the faded blue robe Dad had given her for their 20th anniversary. "Can't sleep either?" she asked, settling into the chair across from me with a soft groan. "I keep thinking about what you said," I admitted, "about forgetting how to take care of each other." She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the tablecloth she had sewn herself decades ago. "When your father died, I thought you children would need each other more than ever. I thought grief would bring you together. Instead, it seemed to scatter you to the wind. We didn't know how to be a family without him," I said, the words coming from a place of truth I hadn't been willing to acknowledge before. "But I was still here," she whispered, and in those 4 words lay a universe of loneliness and abandonment. The next morning, I found Mom in the garden, trying to tend to her flowers with hands that shook from age and medication. She was wearing Dad's old gardening gloves, far too big for her small hands, and the sight of her struggling to grip the watering can was almost more than I could bear. "Let me help," I said, reaching for the can. She looked up at me, squinting in the morning sun, and I saw her as if for the first time in years, not as the eternal mother who would always be there, but as a woman who had grown old while I wasn't paying attention, whose strength had limits, whose time was finite. She used to tend this garden with my father every morning, she said, gesturing to the flower beds that had once been her masterpiece. He would complain about my fussy flowers, but he loved seeing them bloom. After he died, I tried to keep it up, but she trailed off, looking at the weeds that had slowly claimed territory among her roses. I raised you children to stand together, she continued, her voice growing stronger. I taught you to support each other, to be there in times of trouble. But lately, I feel like I raised strangers. The words pierced through every defense I had built around my neglect. Strangers. That's what we had become. Polite, distant strangers who shared DNA and childhood memories, but had forgotten to truly see each other. Your father always said that family wasn't just about blood, Mom continued, pulling a stubborn weed from among her petunias. He said it was about showing up, not just for the good times, but for the ordinary Tuesday afternoons and the difficult conversations and the moments when someone needs you to simply be present. I knelt beside her in the dirt, not caring about my clean clothes, and began pulling weeds alongside her. For a few minutes, we worked in silence, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Connection. Not the performative connection of holiday visits, but the real, messy, imperfect connection of shared work and quiet presence. I'm sorry, Mom, I said. The words inadequate, but necessary. We all are. We've been so busy building our own lives that we forgot the foundation they were built on. She paused in her weeding and looked at me with eyes that held decades of love and disappointment in equal measure. I don't need apologies, sweetheart. I need my children back. That afternoon, I called another family meeting, but this time I came prepared. I had spent the morning going through old photo albums, extracting memories like evidence in a case I was determined to win, the case for our family's soul. Michael and Claire sat in the same positions as the day before, but something had shifted in the atmosphere. Maybe it was the way the afternoon light fell across Dad's empty chair, or maybe it was the weight of Mom's words from the previous evening. But the corporate boardroom energy had been replaced by something more tentative, more human. I want to show you something, I said, spreading photographs across the coffee table like tarot cards revealing our collective past. Do you remember this? The first photo showed Michael at age 8, lying in a hospital bed with pneumonia, Mom asleep in the chair beside him. She had stayed for 6 days straight, I remembered, leaving only to shower and change clothes at home before rushing back to his side. She never left, I said, pointing to her sleeping form. The nurses tried to make her go home, told her the chair wasn't comfortable for sleeping, but she wouldn't budge. She said her place was with her sick child, not in a comfortable bed at home. Michael stared at the photo, his jaw working silently. I could see him remembering the cool washcloths on his fevered forehead, the stories she told to distract him from the IV needle, the way she celebrated when his temperature finally broke, as if he had conquered Mount Everest instead of a childhood illness. The next photo showed Claire's high school graduation, Mom standing proudly beside her, in a dress I now realized she probably sewn herself, since money was always tight in those days. Do you see her hands? I asked, pointing to Mom's fingers in the photo. Look closely. Claire leaned forward, and I watched her face change as she noticed what I had only recently understood. Mom's wedding ring, her original wedding ring, the simple gold band Dad had given her when they were young and hopeful and poor, was gone. She sold it to pay for your college applications, I said quietly. 15 applications to 15 different schools, because you wanted options. The application fees alone cost more than Dad made in a week, but she never said a word about it. She just quietly sold the ring and told Dad she had lost it in the garden. Claire's perfectly composed facade cracked, her eyes filling with tears she couldn't hide behind designer sunglasses this time. "How do you know that?" she whispered. "Mrs. Henderson told me yesterday. She was the one who drove Mom to the pawn shop. She said Mom cried the whole way home, not because she regretted it, but because she was afraid Dad would be hurt when he found out the truth." I placed the final photo on the table. A picture of us all at Dad's funeral, standing together beside his casket, our arms around each other in mutual grief and support. It had been just 2 years ago, but it felt like a lifetime had passed since that moment of shared sorrow and solidarity. "This was the last time we were really together," I said, my voice growing stronger with conviction. "Not just physically present, but emotionally connected. After we buried Dad, we buried our commitment to each other, too." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was the silence of people forced to confront truths they had spent years avoiding. "She gave us everything," I continued, looking directly at each of my siblings. "Her time, her money, her health, her dreams, everything. She worked double shifts at the diner to pay for Michael's football equipment. She learned to use a computer at 60 so she could email Claire in college every day. She postponed her own retirement by 5 years so she could help me with my student loans." "Emily," Michael started, but I wasn't finished. "She sacrificed her own happiness, her own comfort, her own security for us. And when Dad died, when she needed us most, what did we do? We sent flowers to the funeral and disappeared back into our own lives." I stood up, pacing now, the words flowing from a place of righteous anger mixed with desperate love. "Look at her," I said, gesturing toward the kitchen where Mom was pretending to be busy so she wouldn't overhear our conversation. "Really look at her. She's gotten smaller, frailer, lonelier. While we've been building our careers and our social media profiles and our retirement accounts, she's been disappearing a little more each day. What do you want from us, Emily?" Michael's voice was rough with emotion he was struggling to contain. "I want you to remember who you are," I said, meeting his eyes with an intensity that surprised us both. "I want you to remember that before you were a successful businessman, you were a little boy whose mother sat by your hospital bed for 6 days and nights. Before you were a world traveler, Claire, you were a teenager whose dreams mattered enough to a woman that she sold her most precious possession to make them possible." I pointed to Dad's empty chair, no longer a symbol of absence, but a reminder of presence, of the man who had taught us by example what it meant to show up every day for the people you love. Dad never missed a soccer game, never forgot a birthday, never let a day go by without telling Mom he loved her. He didn't have grand gestures or expensive gifts. He just showed up, consistently and completely, for 43 years. That's the example he set for us. The room was so quiet, I could hear the kitchen clock ticking, marking seconds that felt like eternities as my words settled into the spaces between us. "She's not asking for us to uproot our lives," I said, my voice softer now, but no less determined. "She's asking for us to remember that she's still part of them. She's asking for phone calls that aren't rushed, visits that aren't obligations, attention that isn't divided." Michael cleared his throat, struggling with words that didn't come easily to a man accustomed to controlling every situation. "I didn't realize," he began, then stopped, shaking his head. "That's not true. I did realize. I just chose not to think about it because it was easier to focus on work than to deal with the guilt." "We all did," Claire whispered. "It was easier to send flowers than to visit. Easier to make excuses than to make time." I sat back down, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of laying our family's failures bare. So what now? Do we keep pretending that Christmas cards and birthday phone calls are enough? Do we let her spend her final years feeling forgotten by the people she loves most? Or do we figure out how to be the children she deserves?
The question hung in the air like a challenge, daring us to choose between the comfortable distance we had created and the messy, complicated intimacy of real family connection. Michael stood up abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the garden where Mom had been working that morning. When he turned back, his face was transformed by a vulnerability I hadn't seen since we were children. I could arrange to work from home more often, he said slowly, as if testing the words for their weight and possibility. Video conferences instead of in-person meetings, flying out only when absolutely necessary. And I could look into remote work options, Claire added, wiping her eyes with tissues that couldn't quite handle the makeup running down her cheeks. I could move back, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. My job could be done from anywhere with internet access. And this town, this house, it's where I belong. We looked at each other with the tentative recognition of people rediscovering lost family members. Not the polished, successful versions of ourselves we had become, but the essential selves that had been shaped by the woman in the next room and the man whose presence still filled his empty chair. It won't be easy, Michael said, always the practical one. It means changing priorities, rearranging schedules, admitting that success isn't just about career advancement. It means growing up, Claire said with a rueful laugh. Really growing up, not just getting older. The kitchen door opened and Mom appeared with a tray of coffee and the homemade cookies she still baked, despite her arthritis making every roll of the pin painful. She moved slowly but purposefully, setting the tray on the coffee table among the scattered photographs of our shared history. I thought you might be getting hungry, she said, as if she hadn't heard our entire conversation through the thin walls. But I could see in her eyes that she had heard everything, and more than that, she had understood. The hope I saw there was cautious but real, tempered by years of disappointment but not yet extinguished. Mom, Michael said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle, we need to talk, all of us, really talk. She settled into the chair that had always been hers. Not the commanding recliner, but the smaller chair beside it where she had spent countless evenings, her hand resting on his arm while they watched television or discussed their children's futures. She said, I'm listening. And for the first time in years, we talked. Not the surface-level conversations of holiday visits, but the deep, difficult, necessary conversations that real families have. We talked about guilt and regret, about the ways grief had scattered us and the ways love could bring us back together. We talked about mistakes and forgiveness, about the difference between being present and simply showing up. Most importantly, we listened. We listened to Mom describe the loneliness of empty rooms and silent phones. We listened to each other admit the fears and pressures that had driven us away from the source of our strength. We listened to the truth that family is both the most fragile and the most resilient thing we possess. Fragile because it requires constant tending, resilient because love, real love, endures even when it's neglected. As the afternoon turned to evening, something magical happened. The spaces between us began to shrink. Not the physical spaces, we were still sitting in the same chairs, but the emotional distances we had created. Years of accumulated hurt and misunderstanding began to dissolve in the warmth of honest conversation and shared commitment. So, we're really doing this? Claire asked as the sun began to set through the living room windows. We're really going to be a family again? We never stopped being a family, Mom said, reaching across the space between her chair and the couch to take my hand. We just forgot how to act like one. That evening, for the first time in 2 years, all 4 chairs around the kitchen table were occupied. We ate Mom's pot roast, the same recipe she had used throughout our childhood, and talked about plans and possibilities. Michael called his wife to discuss spending more weekends in his hometown. Claire researched remote work options on her phone between bites of mashed potatoes.
I made a mental list of all the things I wanted to do in the house, all the ways I could help make Mom's daily life easier and fuller. But mostly, we simply enjoyed being together. We laughed at Michael's attempt to fix the leaky kitchen faucet, ending with water everywhere and a call to the local plumber. We reminisced about Dad's terrible jokes and worse cooking, about childhood adventures and teenage disasters. We created new memories to add to the old ones, weaving ourselves back into the fabric of family connection. Later, as we sat in the living room digesting both the meal and the magnitude of our commitment to change, I looked at Dad's chair and realized something had shifted. It was no longer a shrine to absence, but a reminder of presence. Not just his presence, but the presence he modeled for us. The presence that said, love is a verb. That family is a choice we make every day. That showing up is both the simplest and most profound gift we can offer each other. Your father would be proud, Mom said, following my gaze to his chair. He always said the measure of our success wouldn't be found in our bank accounts or job titles. I replied, remembering his words from my college graduation. He said it would be found in whether we took care of each other. Michael nodded, his corporate armor fully shed now, revealing the boy who had once built blanket forts with his sisters and cried when his goldfish died. We haven't been very successful by that measure, he said with characteristic honesty. But we can be, Claire added, her voice carrying a determination that surprised me with its strength. Starting now. As the evening wound down and we prepared for bed, Michael and Claire staying in their old rooms for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Dad's death. Wholeness. Not the superficial wholeness of successful individual lives, but the deep, satisfying wholeness that comes from being part of something larger than yourself, something worth fighting for and fighting to preserve. I was the last one to bed, taking a few moments to walk through the house that would soon be mine again, seeing it with new eyes. The creaky stairs that announced our teenage attempts at sneaking out, the kitchen table where we had done homework and played board games and learned the art of family conversation, the living room where we had celebrated every Christmas morning and weathered every family crisis. These walls held our history. But more than that, they held our future. They would witness Michael's weekend visits and Claire's summer stays and my daily presence. They would hear children's laughter again when my siblings brought their families for holidays and vacations. They would shelter the next chapter of our family story, a chapter we would write together with intention and commitment and love. Before turning off the lights, I stopped at Dad's chair one more time. I could almost see him there, smiling with the satisfaction of a man whose greatest work, his family, had finally remembered its own worth. "We're going to take care of each other," I whispered to his memory and his example. The house settled into peaceful quiet around me, but it wasn't the oppressive silence of abandonment anymore. It was the rich, full quiet of a home preparing for new life, new connections, new opportunities to practice the difficult and essential art of loving each other well. Tomorrow would bring challenges, I knew. Changing established patterns never happens overnight, and learning to be present for each other after years of absence would require patience and grace. There would be setbacks and misunderstandings, moments when old habits of distance and self-protection would reassert themselves. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, Martha Sullivan would fall asleep knowing her children remembered they belonged to each other. Tonight, she would dream not of empty rooms and silent phones, but of Sunday dinners and everyday conversations, and the simple miracle of family members who choose, again and again, to show up for each other.
And in the morning, when she came downstairs to make coffee, she would find all three of her children already in the kitchen, ready to help, ready to listen, ready to be present for whatever the day would bring. Dad's chair would remain empty, but the love that had once filled it would overflow into every corner of the house, carried forward by the people he had raised and the woman who had raised them alongside him. The measure of our success would no longer be found in distant achievements, but in the daily choice to value presence over productivity, connection over convenience, and love over the countless excuses we had once used to justify our absence from each other's lives. We would be a family again, not perfect, but present. Not without problems, but committed to facing them together. And in the end, that would be enough. More than enough. It would be everything.